G'day and welcome to the series on how to buy your first commercial property in 70 days. This is a series that I've designed for do-it-yourself investors who want to get into commercial property and want to do it fast. Today we're going to talk about transitioning yourself into a position where you can leave your day job. For a lot of people, the idea of getting a commercial property is to provide them with financial freedom, and quite often the requirement or the desire for that financial freedom is so they may be able to transition in retirement or go into retirement permanently, or perhaps looking at changing their job for another job, that is, leaving their current job and becoming a hands-on investor, a property manager. Other people just look to get the extra income from a commercial property so they can live a different lifestyle. Travel the globe, go to Mauritius, work online and do a couple of YouTube videos. I haven't quite gotten there, but that's the concept that's available as well. So in order to do that for today, we're going to have a look at a few things. We're going to have a look at the idea of having a single investment versus multiple investments. We're going to have a look at having the correct profit mentality when you have a property. And we're going to have a look at what the two things are that I think are the core elements for success. Now, there's, from a fair way back, there was a gentleman called Isaiah Berlin who proposed an essay on hedgehogs and foxes, actually. He used that as symbols, I suppose, for describing people. And it was one of those essays that a few people had read. But it wasn't until Jim Collins put together his book Good to Great, and he pretty well immortalised those two characters, the hedgehog and the fox. Isaiah put forward the idea that some people are hedgehogs. They just look at one thing and they do it really well. A hedgehog, essentially, when it's in trouble, it just rolls itself into a ball, and that's all it does. Doesn't run away, doesn't bark, doesn't bite, it doesn't spit or hail. It just says, you try your best to get me. Whereas a fox will be very much running around all over the place. The fox symbolises someone who has multiple things going on at the same time. And increasingly, Jim Collins went around the basis of saying successful companies, and we could look at successful investors as the parallel to it, are those who really focus on one particular thing. And the foxes are the ones who may have a look at, trying 4 and 5, 6 different things at the same time. They're running here, they're running there, they're going this way, they're going that way. They've got 10 projects started. And I think that is a correct way to have a look at being a commercial property investor or commercial real estate investor, depending on what part of the world you're coming from. So the first thing that I want to iterate to you is, if you're looking to transition to another job, or out of your job, or go into retirement or whatever, have a serious consideration on just focusing on one particular type of commercial property and getting very good at it. And recognise also that your first property is not going to be your ideal final property. It very rarely works out. I liken your first property to having your first push bike and having training wheels. You remember the days when you go, wobble, 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 and when things are going good, Dad would take one training wheel off, and you'd sort of like wobble, wobble, wobble a little bit less. And then when we got to the stage that Dad was comfortable with you not falling off your bike, you'll take the second training wheel off, and then you're off. But recognise that is not your final bike. If you were like me, you probably had 3 or 4 push bikes, or nowadays it's e-scooters. They start with the little ones to the medium-sized ones to the bigger ones, the ones that they go into push bikes. Quite often, life is all about having a transition as you go forward. And the other factor of that is, by getting a somewhat cheapy, perhaps, is the way to look at it for your first one, something that you're cutting your teeth on. If you make a couple of mistakes, it's not going to have you losing your house. Don't be totally mortgaged to the hilt on your first commercial property. Make sure you have some serious risk management assets, similar to what I've done in previous videos in this series. But is a concept that you may actually get away with having to have that consideration of a single revenue versus multiple revenue. It may be that you use that first property to get your knowledge, and then you sell that one and get a second one, and maybe work your way up to your final goal. As an example, commercial property is probably the best one. I've seen people start with one property, get rid of it, get another one, and then get into something perhaps a little bit bigger. Then once they've got their knowledge as well as their financial skill sets in place, and then they get to their final one. And it may be that you're like the hedgehog who only has that one big commercial property, and it's one that'll generate a significant amount of income for you. It's like having all your eggs in one basket, but you've managed to understand what you need to do, and you can work out how to protect that income. Having just one income stream is not necessarily bad. I think it's a little bit misunderstood when people say, you need to have multiple revenue streams. That's very much the big trend now. You have to have 5, 6, 7 revenue streams to work from. But like I said, once again, doing 6, 7 revenue streams, you're probably going to have 6, 7 small ones. Whereas if you focus on one big one, you're going to get something that gives you a large amount of income. On the other flip side, there's a lot to be said for having multiple revenue streams. If you have like a commercial property here and a residential property there, and perhaps an industrial shed somewhere else, provided you know what you're doing and they're good assets, that they give you a good sense of flexibility and a little bit of risk management. If one goes into trouble, then you haven't got all your eggs in one basket. So you need to have a bit of a think when you're looking to transition out of your job. If you're going into commercial property, recognise your first one isn't going to be your final one. I've never ever seen that being the case, except in cases when people buy a property and realise that this is not for them and they just hang on to that one for a long time. But it's more a case of a stepping stone. But after that stepping stone, have a think. Are you looking towards having perhaps a large single complex, or are you looking at having several complexes in different areas? So that's one of the things that you need to have a look at. If you've been part of my group, you'll have a spirax book, and I recommend that you put down this video, transitioning into or leaving your day job, and one of your questions, one of your action items is to have a think. Are you going to be the type of person who prefers to have a single investment or multiple investment? And hours on deck is probably one consideration. If you're an investor who doesn't have a lot of time to do your investments, then a single one may be a better option. If you're someone who's really looking forward to it and has a great passion, then perhaps multiple investments is the option for you to go to. Now, say you've got your commercial property. One of the things that you need to have a good understanding of is a correct profit mentality. Now, I'm in Bundaberg, we're a regional area, and one of the big challenges that I have is I have a lot of multi-generational buildings. It may be in the parents' building, or it may be someone who's had that building for 20, 30, 40 years. And they've gotten to the stage that they don't spend any money on it. All it is a way to squeeze as much money as they can out of their landlords, out of their lessees. And that is the wrong mentality in my view. I mean, it could be argued that it's worked for them. I mean, it's worked for them for 20, 30, 40 years. But you can tell the buildings, they're the ones that have got the leaks in the roof. They're the ones that haven't had any work done to them. It's the ones where the tenant has almost had to beg and even pay for getting solar onto the property. There's been no expansions, no extensions, no reason to increase revenue from rent other than CPI or the regular increase or reviews. As opposed to, and I think the American example of truck lots is a classic example. The investor will buy the block of land and then they put a fence around it. That's their first improvement, which allows security for the truck drivers who are parking there. Similar to Australia, there's a lot of trucking industry and they don't all have a place to park their prime movers. If you live in a cul-de-sac in a normal suburban area, they're not going to be happy with you parking your prime mover in the middle of it. So, there's an increasing industry of people who just provide places for trucks to park, similar to a car park. And then they'll go to things like, all right, they'll put up a shed, and the truck drivers can put their trucks in there and maintain it. And they charge them an hourly rate to do their own maintenance on their vehicles. They may have a depot to put their used tyres, because they found that they're going to go elsewhere and get rid of the tyres anyway. So if you can have a little tip section, and once again you charge them $50 a tyre or whatever the going rate is, they go through there. They could even have a truck washing bay. A lot of drivers want to have a good clean truck as part of maintenance as well as part of brand. So you can see how putting extra bits and pieces onto the property is a good aspect, and it is the mentality that they have of not squeezing all the profit out of them, but getting to a stage where you have an optimal profit level, one where you've got good product, you've got good asset growth, and you've got good revenue growth, but you've got happy customers who aren't going to be cantankerous, and you're not going to be in a situation, especially with steel sheds, they may have a 20-year life expectancy on them. When you get near that stage, you can tell that shed's not going to last another 5 or 10 years. You need to make sure you're using the profit to an optimal level rather than squeezing it all out, because you need to keep putting in improvements on your property. So you need to have the correct mindset of having an optimal profit level rather than a maximum profit level. Now, there are two elements to success that I think are critical. One is what we would call time in the market. If you can survive your first, similar to a small business, 2 to 3 years, then you dramatically increase the odds of having an asset that's going to do well for you. If you've had a tenant in there or it's even multiple tenants, if you've had them in there for 3 to 5 years, you're probably at the stage you've suddenly got some decent equity in the property. You've worked out how to increase your revenue a little bit, either by improving the property or even just CPI, hopefully outstripping your mortgage rates. If you've got lending as part of the property, you should be at the stage where some of that's coming down depending on the length of the loan. Now, there's all sorts of different types of loans. Some of them are 3 years, 5 years, some are 20 years. But after having 3 or 5 years, you find that the payments become a little bit easier, similar to your house payments. You find that they're really painful the first couple of years, and then you get used to it, and then you suddenly find that I could probably put another 5 or 10% to increase the equity and get the loan down and reduce the interest rate. So there's many ways to increase the profit of your property, and one of them is to reduce that interest rate rather than just squeezing it out of your tenant. And the second key factor in being a successful property owner or property investor is the size of the investment. If you have $1 million commercial property, you think, wow, that's fantastic. And if you find that you get 8% net return on it, that's 80 grand, and you're thinking, hey, this is pretty good. By the time you take tax out of that and you take your debt out of that, you may be left with perhaps 30 or 40 grand, which is still okay. But you need to recognize that's not enough for you to quit your day job. You also need to have a little bit of luck. The last thing you want is your tenants suddenly going bankrupt after 6 or 8 weeks of you being the new landlord. Unfortunately, it does happen. There's a lot of things that are outside of your control that just come down to luck. Sometimes you have good luck, sometimes you have bad luck, but you need to factor that in. So don't leave your day job straight away. Maybe transition into retirement rather than leap straight into it, or transition into investment. Go to 4 days a week. That's what I did for a while, and that actually turns out great. I have a 3-day weekend every weekend, and still had plenty of income coming in for the 4 days that I worked. That sort of mentality is what you're looking for, because it's the size of your investment that really is going to dictate it. Now, whether it's one big commercial property or several smaller ones, it's the same concept. How much is it that you're getting at the end of the day is what will determine whether you can leave your day job. The other thing too is don't be afraid to hang in your day job for a year or two, because if you've got a good investment that's bringing 80 grand and you got another 2 years working at your job, even if it's part-time, that's a significant moolah going into your bank account to give you a nice war chest, so that when you are ready to leave your day job, you're almost in a situation where you're ready to go buy your second commercial property. If you go into the mindset of having multiple properties or multiple revenue streams, even if you use it as one aspect, then remember the likes of people like Peter Drucker, who explained that quite often it's healthy to have multiple revenue streams, but even if they do kick off and succeed, and look, for every 10 revenue streams you start, probably 8 of them aren't going to work. One of them will break even, and one will be what they call a 10-4. It'll return like 10 times the value of what you had. The point to recognise is quite often these revenue streams aren't going to give you more than 30% of what your current income is, no matter how hard you try. It's just a weird mathematical formula. I don't know if it's a factor of time that you can put into the investment, or if it's just the forces of business and commerce that keep you in place. So when you start doing budgets in regards to how much is that commercial property going to do, and should we have some shares as well, and what about a superannuation, recognise that only probably one of them is going to give you 30% revenue stream. So you need to once again recognise that into your long-term thinking. So that's pretty much my thoughts for today. We've gone through single and multiple revenue streams, we've gone through profit mentality, and we've gone through the 2 elements of success. And if you do your homework, which your homework today is just have a look at in your spirax book, write down whether you're going to look at a single revenue or multiple revenue model. And if you've done that, you can take off number 19, which was actually yesterday's video. I just forgot to take it off. For those new to our channel, we've put 70 little cards over our dream commercial property as motivation to let us know how we're going and progressing on our program. So, and today's video is number 20 in the series, which is up here. So that's starting to reveal a significant part of the picture behind us, and that just lets us have a little bit of fun. So until next time, this is Peter Bender from Bundaberg Commercial. Take care and God bless.